comprehensive plan, the 2021 plan. I want to start by thanking Councilors McPhail and Archer for being part of this long-range planning committee, and also all of the members of the long-range planning committee that have agreed to serve with the group. Thank you for your time. And I also definitely want to thank the public that is here this evening to join us, and other folks that will join us over the course of the year or so that will be doing this. I want to start by introducing staff that will be involved with all of this project. Bob Hamblin, our city planner, and also Isabel Exley, who's our Planning and Economic Development Associate, and Jessa Berna, who's our Economic Development Specialist. And for those of you who don't know me, but I'm sure most of you do by now, I'm Denise Clavette, Director of Planning and Economic Development. I'd like to take this time to introduce our consultants from Stantec, who we're grateful for their A, submitting their application, B, for getting the job, the consulting job, but they've been great and very inquisitive and very engaged with community. I mean, as you can well imagine, that starting a project of this magnitude during COVID is not for the faint of heart. They did come up and drive up and take a look around the community, and with a caravan viewing of Saco, so that we would be completely socially distant. It was just great. And so they've done a lot of research to date, and they've got a lot of information to provide this evening, and we want your input. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our consultants, Phil Shaping, and also David Dixon. And they'll be, I'll turn it over to them. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Denise. David, I'll ask you to introduce yourself in just a minute here. My name is Phil Shaping, and I'm a planner and urban designer with Stantec and their Urban Places group. And we are just really excited to be working with Denise's team in the City of Saco on this comprehensive plan effort. And we're really excited that all of you are taking time out of your evenings to join us to learn about this process and to talk with each other as we get further into the meeting. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things. This meeting will be recorded. It will be posted online after the meeting, probably sometime tomorrow for others to view. And we're going to ask that everybody, we're going to go ahead and mute everyone who is not speaking. And so, David, when you get to your part of the presentation, you will unmute yourself. So with that, I'm going to ask David just to provide a quick little intro, and then we'll jump right in.
I'm David Dixon. I do all the same things that Phil does, and am equally excited to be able to work with all of you and get to meet many of you tonight. I will quickly editorialize that from what we have learned and what we sort of knew about what is happening to sort of basic demographics and economic development trends, et cetera, today and over the next 20 years, that we look at Saco as a place with just tremendous opportunity going forward, and really look forward to helping all of you unlock it. That is not to say there aren't challenges, but we think those can be met and the opportunities realized. So very much look forward to also learning a lot from all of you tonight.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, David. And with that, I will go ahead and get started. We've covered our introductions here. Our agenda for today is up here on the screen. I want to talk a little bit about what a comprehensive plan is, so that we can all have an understanding of what it is that we're working towards over the next 15 months. And then we'll have a polling opportunity to learn a little bit about who is in the room here with us today online. And then talking a little bit about the trends that we're seeing nationally and regionally that are impacting Saco, and then specifically what we have been learning since we have jumped into this project. So for those who are not familiar with a comprehensive plan, this is a city sort of guiding vision and policy framework. The state of Maine encourages towns and cities to complete comprehensive plans. And the reason for that is that it provides a community a chance to take a long range look at a number of different topics. So instead of focusing on the day-to-day, this is an opportunity to step back and think big picture and long term. In the next 10 to 15 years, where does this community want to see itself? And we're here as consultants to sort of lend our expertise and outside perspective, but we really do look to the community to help guide us along this journey. As I mentioned, the state kind of encourages towns and cities to complete this plan. It helps provide protection for zoning and impact fees and other things. It also helps the city to qualify for certain grants and loans, particularly related to transportation projects. But really the biggest thing is that this is an opportunity to talk together, like we will later tonight, about all of the different places that make up our community and how we can continue to build on them in the future. The city's last comprehensive plan was completed back in 2011, so it's coming up on the expiration of its 12-year term soon. And so we're embarking on this effort, and the state sort of puts out a roadmap for us. They want this list of required elements, and each of them is important in their own way. The vision statement is what we're focused on from the beginning here, really thinking big picture about where we want our community to be in 10 to 15 years. And as I mentioned, this public participation piece is really what drives the process. It allows us to hear a variety of different viewpoints from residents, from business owners, from city staff and departments about what's working well, where do we want to be, and most importantly, how do we get there, that implementation, the evaluation component. Comprehensive plan, as the name sort of implies, covers a lot of different topics. So those are all listed here. The important thing is that we don't look at these individually, but we look to understand how they are interrelated and how they impact each other. As an example, transportation and housing and the cost of doing business in a city are all closely related, and those impact water resources, natural resources, land that is being developed or not. And so these are all tied together, and that's what we're really, going to be looking at during the course of this process. In 2018, the city did a sort of a targeted update to part of the comprehensive plan, really focusing on the downtown area, and added 2 new chapters on sea level rise and arts and culture, which we're going to be carrying forward in this effort. And in general, started to take kind of a bigger picture of sustainability and resiliency. So the process that we are beginning here for us has 3 big parts to it. The first is to imagine, as I mentioned at the beginning, thinking big picture, long term, what is our shared vision for the future of our community? And tonight is the beginning of that process. It's going to continue online after tonight, and we're going to come back to you throughout the process to make sure that we're keeping on track. The second stage that we'll go through is the planning stage. And that's where we're going to identify a series of goals that help us figure out how to make that vision real, and then a set of policies on how we're going to achieve the goals. And throughout this process, we are thinking about how we're going to implement this, how we're going to act on the plan. But at the very end is when it all sort of comes together into a series of strategies around how we're implementing the policies. So imagine, plan, and act. Those are the 3 stages we'll be moving through over the course of this process. There's a lot of people who are going to be involved in this. Denise had mentioned the Long Range Planning Committee that was recently approved by City Council. But really, again, I want to emphasize that community participation is a big part of this. And so after the meeting tonight, I would encourage everybody to please tell your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers about this process. There is a webpage on the city's website that has more information about the process. And we'll also have a link up shortly to an interactive website where we're going to have a survey and some mapping exercises. And so I'd really ask everybody here to help us spread the word. We want to hear from everybody from, your grade school kids and your high schoolers all the way through your grandparents. So as many people as we can hear from, the stronger this plan will be. just to talk for just a moment about the Long Range Planning Committee. This really is an important part of the process. They were formed as an advisory committee to City Council. It's 15 members from a number of different organizations and boards and commissions in the city, supported by 6 city staff. And they are charged both to help us with the planning process, but then once the plan is complete, to help monitor the implementation process. And that's a really important part of this. How do you implement the vision in the plan? So they'll have a very important role both during our time together with you, but then continuing for the next 10 to 15 years as this plan is implemented. In terms of timeline for this process, as Denise had mentioned, we got started in the fall, coming up to Saco and having an opportunity to walk around Main Street and drive around the city, and just really enjoyed what unfortunately was kind of a cold, misty, gray day, but really came to appreciate all of the different parts of the city, which was really helpful for us. Today, we're sort of kicking off the community visioning stage of this. In the spring, we're going to dig into a little bit more detail on a couple of topics that really seem to be high priorities for people. We'll be developing the different parts of the plan over the summer and into the fall, and then late fall and into the winter, sort of the final plan that'll go through the public approval process. So with that, I want to pause for a moment, and if you are looking at your screen, you're going to see a poll pop up in just a moment here. Isabel, when you are ready, you can go ahead and launch that poll. And this is just to help us understand who is here with us tonight. It's really helpful for us to get a sense of, how long people have lived here, what part of the city you live in, and also to understand the representation in terms of age, race, gender. So if you could fill this survey out, it'll take hopefully just a minute or two to get through. And then at the end of this, we'll share the results so we can all kind of see who's in the room. As we are waiting for everyone to complete this survey, up next will be David, who is going to talk bigger picture about some of the trends that we see in our work, both throughout New England and throughout the country, which I hope you'll find really interesting. I think they are trends in terms of how people are living, how our overall population is aging, and just the importance of, jobs and education and economic development, and how that, the role that those trends are going to play here in Saco.
So Phil, just letting you know, maybe we as the leaders aren't able to fill it in, but it's not working for me. So just thought, I didn't know if other people were having difficulty.
Okay. I see we have 11 people. 11 people that participated. Isabel, I think we accidentally closed the poll.
What are we clicking on, Phil?
Bob and Denise, anyone who's a host, you folks won't be able to see it, but the public will. And the only way that we can do this is if I relaunch it. So I'm sorry to those of you who had already filled it out.
We will start fresh.
Okay.
So if you filled it out before, fill it out again, please.
Yes, that way we'll have all of the answers in one place. So we have the first couple answers trickling in here. All right, we're just over half of participants have responded. Isabel, let's give it another 30 seconds and then we'll close the poll. I have a preview of the results here on my screen. We'll share them in just a moment, but as I'm looking through here, we have just about 3/4 of participants have responded and a lot of longtime residents, which is always great to see. About half of respondents appear to live in either downtown or what we're calling sort of the in-town neighborhoods, and then about 1/4 in North Saco. All right, Isabel, can you please close the poll and share the results? So everyone should be able to see a summary of results up on your screen here. So as I was mentioning, the majority of our respondents have lived in Saco for more than 20 years. So that's great. There's a lot of lived experience and time here. And so we look forward to hearing that during the discussion part of the conversation. As I mentioned, about half living downtown and in-town neighborhoods and 1/4 up in North Saco. Large majority of owners, as we'll talk about here a little bit later in the presentation, that is skewed a little more heavily towards owners here than in Saco overall. So we'll talk about that. About 30% work in Saco, just less than 30 work somewhere else. Over 1/4 of respondents have been working remotely during the pandemic. That's always kind of an interesting question just to understand those work trends. Even 50-50 split on gender. So that's good to see. And majority in the 55 to 64 age range. Just scanning through the rest of these. So, how did you hear about this event? About 1/3 from the city email or newsletter, and then social media, the website. So that is great to see these. So thank you everybody for filling that out. As we are collecting online feedback as well, we'll be collecting those types of responses as well, so we can kind of understand how our input is reflecting the community that we know it from other data. So with that, I am going to turn it over to David and ask him, oops, this was supposed to come up during the poll. David, ask you to unmute yourself and talk about setting the context for us here.
All right. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me now, Phil?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks. All right. So as Phil said, I'm going to actually sort of set the stage, talk about context. And I realize as I listen to Phil again talk about imagine, plan, and act, this context has bearing on all three, or this stage setting. And I'm going, and by stage setting, I mean the sort of fundamental trends that are not determining our future, but are important factors that we need to take into account as we take responsibility for planning our future. Think of them as tools, not prognostications. So I want to start by talking about the pandemic. And I notice that 50% of you are, as a result, working at home or often at home. I'm right up there with you. And very much looking forward to the post-vaccine world. And of course have, like all of you, thought about how is the pandemic changing our lives, the nature of our communities, the future of our communities. And there are a couple of, we're all going to learn a lot, but there are a couple of messages that are already becoming fairly clear. Or not fairly, are becoming clear. People have really discovered and report again and again the joys of finding nature and great public spaces close by, places they can walk to, places where they can enjoy community, take walks with friends. And I think there's a strong expectation that the joy we find in that is not going to fade away in our post-COVID world. This will be one of the positive things we have learned. Many communities have adapted streets for all kinds, for more bike riding, more walking, but particularly for outdoor dining. Maybe even taking, in some cases, curbside parking spaces, certainly expanding out into sidewalks. And people have discovered that they really like this in the right sort of weather, particularly on a weekend evening when there's not a lot of traffic there's less traffic on the street, and it's not so bad to steal a lane to put some tables and maybe lamps to heat out with. And people have reported again and again how much they love walking down the street and running into friends, because we're just outdoors more. We're leading a more public life in this regard. The pandemic has also accelerated trends that are already underway. One is the changes in retail, and you'll hear us talk a little bit more about this, but online retailing is outcompeting auto-oriented, think malls, strip shopping, big box retail, think the Home Depots of the world, even more than the pace of that of online and the effectiveness of online competition have accelerated. And retail that depends on somebody driving there or is sort of real mass market retail is suffering the most. Retail that people can walk to has probably stood up more successfully or been more successful in responding to neighborhood retail, even some Main Street retail. On the other hand, many of these businesses have suffered because they're much smaller businesses. And while small business this is not a trend that's been accelerated. This is something that has happened very much as a result of COVID. There's, I think, a lot of indications that small retail businesses in walkable neighborhoods may be set to flourish when the pandemic is over, and we can talk more about that. Next, please. There are certain trends, very important trends that have not changed. Starts with the fundamental, I'm going to go, demographic, economic changes that are reshaping our world. The changes to mobility, I'm going to talk more about these in a minute. Environmental trends, climate change, rising sea levels. All of these actually come together to favor walkable, amenitized, community-rich places. And I was struck that 50% of you live in downtown Saco, which is a pretty great example of the kind of neighborhood, downtowns, closer in neighborhoods, that these trends collectively will support going forward. Now we have to do the right planning to unlock the benefits of that support, but the wind is in their sails. And if anything, this underlies why it's even more important to plan for our community's futures right now. Next, please. So let's start with economic imperative. To be a little bit direct here, between now and let's say 2004, already today, if you look at this chart, look at the 2020 column, there are 164 million jobs in this country. If you add up the blue, 65%, and that's probably closer to 70% in reality of total jobs require some form of higher education. It might be 2 years of college, it may be some couple years of more expert training, but basically the era of graduating high school and getting a job that approach to getting into the workforce is getting tougher and tougher. I'll put it that way. Probably 90+% of net new jobs require higher education. Now, because our families are growing, we're having kids later and fewer of them, et cetera, and we've been doing this for a while. Our workforce is also growing much more slowly. Next slide, please. Uh, and this means that we have a shortage of high skill workers in particular. This is actually a global shortage. It's probably in the US and Canada, it's probably around, we probably need about 10%, 10 to 15% more high skill educated workers than we have. That means basically, whereas when I got out of college, everybody told you go where the jobs are. Today, the jobs go where folks with education want to live. And it is these jobs, it's the knowledge industry jobs that really drive our economic future. You'll notice actually for medium skilled workers, maybe just a high school education, probably more of those than there are jobs these days. And one reason to really think about be able to train folks and help them make an economic transition. But the real message here is the value of being the kind of community, next please, that really attracts the kind of talent that in turn attracts jobs and investment. Now, these days, I think the fact that majority of us are most or all the time working at home, much or all the time working at home, clearly virtual work has taken off, but there's a lot of evidence to show that virtual workers, people who are not in the office, if they don't have kids, are particularly, well, let me take a step back. The kind of talent that these companies want, educated workers, are much more interested in living in walkable, heavily amenitized neighborhoods near historic main streets, places that are community rich than the population as a whole. So therefore, it is those communities that have walkable downtowns, great characterful close-in neighborhoods, and frankly, if you've got a great seacoast also, that sure doesn't hurt, that are in the most competitive position to attract the kind of talent that then draws jobs and investment. But the best thing a city can do to invest in economic development these days is invest in its main street, actually. So luckily, given this reality, because, let me take a step back. And so, and folks who are working virtually, if they don't have kids, are even more interested than their other peers in living in these amenity-rich, walkable, lively places, because this is where they find community that they don't find at work. And these are the folks actually most likely to start new businesses that then in turn create jobs. So from both perspectives, really investing in place, in creating livable, walkable, ability-rich places pays rich dividends in terms of jobs, investment, fiscal tax, the ability to have a strong tax base. So at the same time, because our society is aging, but also because many of us just having fewer kids than our parents did, we about over the next 20 years, 80+% of our net workforce. So let's say in 1970, about 50% of us lived, or more than 50% of us lived in households with kids. That's the gray and the sort of the yellow. The gray bar portion of the bar is households with two parents and children. Yellow, single parent with kids. Orange, singles and couples. You'll notice the share of singles and couples has gone from about 35% to about close to 70% of total households, maybe 65% between 1970 and what's projected for the early 2030s. If you add to that, and these are folks who strongly prefer to live in the same walkable, mixed use, lively, more sort of urban, downtown, close-in neighborhoods that appeal to the folks we're trying to attract in terms of talent. What this means is that going forward, 80+% of our growth for the next 20 years is actually going to be households that are singles and couples without kids. They are much more interested in living in multifamily townhouses, houses on small lots close in urban neighborhoods. We have a real shortage of that housing. That's true of Saco. That's true of virtually every community in America that has some version of this mismatch, which means that there will be a great deal of demand for housing. Housing is 2/3 of our real estate economy, meaning a great deal of real estate investment interest in downtown, in close-in neighborhoods, exactly the places where that we want to bring to life to attract the kind of talent that boosts our economy. Thanks. So added to all of this, you probably all heard about autonomous mobility. I'm not actually going to start there, but we're going through, we're on the cusp of, we've already started some really dramatic changes in how we move around. One is the rise of rideshare, shared mobility, maybe less in Saco, but in major cities. This means that, for example, hotels today maybe need half the parking they did 10 years ago even. It's already making a real difference. What is probably more important going forward for places like Saco is that over the next 10, 15 years, we're going to move into the era of connected vehicles. These are vehicles that talk to each other. They know what's going on, a mile ahead in terms of traffic. They know when signals are going to change long before we do, et cetera. They drive in lanes that are 7 feet wide, not 10 or 11 feet, because they don't bump into each other. At least they're not supposed to. And they also self-park, which means, and they park in a lot less space than we do. They're much better at parking themselves. At some point we'll get to a garage, we'll get out of our car and say, go park yourself, if you'll excuse me. That means that all of the parking that we have now, the surface lots, the parking structures, will begin to accommodate more and more cars, which means that we can add development without adding parking, which really again favors downtown, close-in neighborhoods. And this will begin to free up the acres and acres of surface parking in downtown that currently could house mixed use, live, work, play, shop buildings. In about sometime in the late 2030s, early 2040s, we will be in the era of autonomous mobility. Vehicles will drive themselves. That will be certainly change much of our lives. What it will probably, most important is in cities like Saco that have the critical mass of people and destinations, that shared autonomous mobility will become the rule. So it's much less likely that we'll own our own probably quite expensive autonomous vehicle, but that we will simply tap a button on our phone and in 2 minutes a vehicle will pick us up, take us where we want to go. There may be other folks in it, but the vehicle knows where everyone's going. It's planned this efficiently. This will also cut our mobility costs by about 50%. Every car costs today $10,000, $12,000 or more to own and operate a car. We won't be able to spend half that much on shared autonomous mobility, meaning there will be sort of a subsidy for living in downtown and closer in neighborhoods. Next, please. And then, of course, we have climate change, and all of this pertains to climate change in one way. The more compact we live, the more environmentally responsible we are. So folks who live downtown and close in neighborhoods have much lower carbon footprints than folks who live out in the country, just because they drive so much more. As Saco grows sort of more in rather than out, it'll be more environmentally responsible. But it's also going to be expensive. We're only going to get so many dollars from federal government and state to protect our neighborhoods. It's unlikely we'll abandon folks. I think we're going to seek to protect them. And so we'll need to worry about building our tax base, and downtown and urban neighborhoods tend to do that more efficiently. So I've given you a lot to think about. Phil, are we stopping for questions, or do you want to do that at the end?
We'll do questions kind of at the end and in the small group breakouts.
Okay. The one thing I want to emphasize is none of this is telling us how we should live. This information is to give us the tools so we can live the way we want and have the kind of community we want. And thank you very much.
Thank you, David. And I think that last point is a really good one. There are a lot of bigger trends that are, broader beyond Saco, beyond Maine, that influence all of our communities. And the challenge is to figure out how to harness those to create the types of places that we all want, rather than to let ourselves be shaped by those outside forces. So with that, I want to pause for one more quick poll question. Isabel, if you want to pop that up. As I mentioned earlier on, that public participation is a big part of that. And so if you are interested, we're going to pop up a poll here in just a moment, I think, to ask for your email address. And if you would like to join the mailing list, you'll get project updates, updates on the website, other interactive opportunities online. We won't share this information with anyone, but you will be notified of other events. And so this will help keep you informed. And then, like I said, if you can just help us spread the word and bring a friend to the next meeting, that would be great. I'll give people just a few more seconds here. And while we are doing that, I'm going to move on to the last part of our presentation here before we get to our breakout rooms. And here I do want to focus down from the bigger picture trends that David talked about to specifically what's happening in Saco today. Just, to start off with the perspective of somebody who came there for the first time this fall, it was really striking to me the great variety of places here in Saco. You have downtown and the in-town neighborhoods, but you also have, coastal neighborhoods, great views of the sea, and you have more rural agricultural areas where you can kind of feel like you have more space. You can see the rolling hills, the farms, you see the Saco River out along Boom Road. So all within one city, you have this great diversity of different places. They all have, their own strengths. They all contribute something to what Saco is as a community. And I think, it's just striking. Not every place has that variety. And in addition to that, there's also a lot of other assets and resources that the city has, ranging from the jobs that are here, the natural resources and parks that are available for people to visit, the different ways to move around. You have the train station, the buses, the Eastern Trail, which is a great amenity for walking and biking and running, and then the historic character that's throughout the downtown and Saco Island area. So just a lot of great strengths that we want to build on, to strengthen, to preserve, and really just take advantage of in the future. Another thing that really struck us as we were getting started here are the number of other big projects that the city is undertaking. A lot of you are probably familiar with the zoning ordinance revision that is wrapping up right now. All I'll say about this is that it was a major implementation recommendation from the 2018 comp plan update. And what it really did is kind of simplify the zoning ordinance, make it a little bit more easily understandable and also easier to update. And so as we go through this comprehensive plan process, there may be further zoning recommendations that come out of that. Another big effort underway is the Economic Development Action Plan being done by another consulting firm, Camoin Associates. Their recommendations related to economic development are going to be incorporated directly into the comprehensive plan. They've done a number of conversations with business owners and other stakeholder focus groups. So all of that information is part of our research that we're building on. And their big message was that the city really has an imperative to increase economic resiliency by building greater economic diversification, really focusing on the specific industries where the city does have a local and regional strength, continuing to fill out the business parks, but not necessarily expanding them, focus on attracting higher value jobs, jobs with higher incomes, different education levels. Together with that is the training component, and then signature projects. So mixed use projects, riverfront projects that can create additional places in Saco that really are amenities that attract people and also benefit the residents who live here as well. A number of other projects that factor into this as well. Big takeaway from this is that Saco is a city that is doing a lot, really actively thinking about the future and being proactive about, erosion at Camp Ellis, some of the traffic congestion issues with the interstate, what's happening on Saco Island, and taking advantage of the multimodal opportunity there and the trains and the buses that are there. So this is a city that's really doing a lot. I think it makes it an exciting place to work in, and a lot to draw on in the comprehensive plan process. This is just sort of a quick overview map of the city. And as we kind of alluded to in that first poll of where do you live, and in some of those pictures, at an initial glance, we see sort of 4 big character areas: the downtown and in-town neighborhoods, the coastal neighborhoods and Ferry Road, Portland Road, which is a very different character than either of those, and then North Saco, which has much more of the, rural open space feel to it. And all of that together is what makes up Saco. And so we want to pay attention to each of those during the comprehensive plan process. This slide here is sort of the summary of all that will follow. These are kind of the big themes that we're getting from the research we've done, from the conversation with stakeholders, from city staff departments to developers, property owners, business owners, in terms of kind of where Saco is today. And those messages are that the city is growing, and particularly within Maine, that puts it in the top third of cities that are actually gaining population. But it's also aging at the same time. And so there are dynamics at work there. That growing population that's also aging leads to some shifting housing preferences. We've also heard a lot about the rising cost of housing as Portland gets more and more expensive, and people are looking further out. That has an impact on Saco's future. As I mentioned, from the Economic Development Action Plan, the need for more diverse and more high-paying jobs to help build a local tax base. From a transportation perspective, how we move around, there are some bigger regional pressures, and that's where these are things that Saco can't deal with by itself and has to work with its neighbors and the Metropolitan Planning Organization. But locally, there's also an opportunity for people to get around by walking, by biking, by taking the bus, things like that. And so those are important considerations for us. As I mentioned, the diverse natural resources that are here, and thinking about how we can protect those and preserve them for future generations. And then the importance of adapting to a changing environment. And again, what needs to be done is bigger than what the city alone can do. But there are some things that we can be proactively thinking about now. So just quickly to go through sort of each of those in a little bit more detail. The purpose of this next part is really just to kind of frame our discussion about the future of the city, and also to give all of us kind of a shared understanding of kind of where things are today. So starting off with the people, the demographics, who lives here, who makes up Saco today. As I mentioned, the population is growing. The left side of this chart in the solid line is population change from 2006 to 2016. And then on the right side of that dotted line is the state's projections out to 2036. And so the state projects that the rate of growth is going to keep increasing a little bit. Another interesting fact, I think, is just the median age here, 44, is about what Maine is. And Maine is actually the oldest state in the United States from a median age perspective. Your neighbor next door, Biddeford, actually has a median age that's almost 10 years younger. Their median age is 35. And so that's an interesting dynamic. And just something for us to keep in mind that kind of informs some of our thinking around, the types of services that will be needed here, and also how we, can grow. As we look, this is just a 5-year population projection of where that growth is happening. On the top of the line, that's where we're seeing a net increase in population. And you see that's mostly in the 65 plus population, and what you might call a young professional age range, 25 to 35, freshly graduated, freshly out of high school, looking to get started in their careers, not necessarily a lot of savings to build up to buy a house yet. The 65 plus population might have raised a family in a single family house, but now might be looking for a place where they don't have a big yard to take care of. They don't need 4 bedrooms necessarily. So all of this kind of influences housing preferences. As we look at the housing that Saco has today, about 59% of the housing units would be single family detached, and the rest are either attached units, sort of townhouses, multifamily, which would be apartments primarily, and then actually for a city, a not insignificant number of mobile homes. And so all of those provide housing choices for people at different income levels with different living preferences. And so it's all important to kind of the makeup of the city. But, as I mentioned, as housing preferences change, we look at the difference between single family construction and multifamily construction. And over the past 10 years here, multifamily has still sort of lagged behind single family overall. There are a couple years you see on the chart there where there were significant approvals done. But in general, it's still single family outpacing multifamily. And so that's a trend we want to look at and think about how that compares to how we see ourselves growing in the future, how our housing needs are changing as we age or as we grow differently, and think about what that means from a policy perspective and where we're building. And as I mentioned before, another thing we've heard a lot about is just the increase in costs. This is just looking at the construction cost of single family housing, not including the cost of land. And a 25% increase over 5 years is pretty significant. And that's obviously driving the increase in the sale price of houses. And so all of that factors into affordability and trying to continue being a community where people of different income levels can continue to live comfortably. That's represented here when the state identifies these affordability indexes. It's comparing the median homeowner or renter income versus the median price for a house or for a 2-bedroom apartment. And you see in that third category in each of these charts kind of the difference between what an affordable home price would be if you were to spend 30% of that median income on housing and what the actual price of housing is. And so that's something we're very much aware of. This next section, just a quick summary of the work that Camoin Associates has done. Saco has seen job growth over the last 5 years, so that's great, at a higher rate than the state, but lower than the surrounding counties. These are the local industrial strengths, which they recommend, trying to sort of target and build from, but that the difference from the regional growth perspective has led to this interesting sort of situation where in Saco, the population is growing faster than the number of job opportunities. And that's the taller blue line on the left versus the shorter orange line or green line next to it there on the left for Saco. That's actually the flip of most of your neighbors. So you have greater residential growth than job growth. That means more people are having to commute further distances for their jobs. They can't live near where they work. And so that has some implications that we take into consideration as we do our work. Another interesting finding from that study was that the average earnings per job here in Saco is actually lower than the region. In general, the city imports jobs, that is, people are coming to Saco from other locations to work in service occupations, think restaurants, retail clerks, those sorts of things. And the people who live in Saco tend to be working somewhere else in what tend to be higher paying professional occupations. So that's another interesting dynamic that report identified. Now, shifting gears and thinking a little bit about transportation, how we move around, I mentioned there's both some regional challenges and also local opportunities. We've heard from a lot of the initial conversations we've had with people, about different traffic challenges, particularly around I-95. The main turnpike project that's in the planning phases right now is trying to address some of those. But as I mentioned before, a lot of that is regional. And so our options are somewhat limited. There are certainly things we can do, and a lot of that is regional cooperation. And a lot of that is looking at different ways of moving around and where our jobs are located for our residents, things like that. This chart on the right here shows that the majority of people who live in Saco work somewhere else, and they typically are driving by themselves to those jobs. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that does have implications then for traffic during the morning and evening rush hours when we're not all working from our living rooms and bedrooms. David touched on this a little bit during his part of the presentation as well. But when you look at the combined costs of both housing and transportation, it's interesting, and this is a pattern you see in almost every city and town, that the closer into a walkable downtown area you are, the less of your household income you're spending on the combined cost of housing and transportation together. The housing may cost a little bit more, but the transportation is probably going to cost a little bit less. So here in the lighter colors clustered around downtown, both downtown Saco and Biddeford, households are spending a lower share of their income on those combined costs than out in the coastal neighborhoods or in North Saco. We've also seen an interesting increase in ridership. These are all pre-pandemic numbers, but the transit system has seen an increase over the last several years. Downeast or Amtrak has seen an increase in service. The Eastern Trail, while it doesn't have trail counters out right now, just kind of anecdotally, they've seen 2 or 3 times the number of users out during the pandemic. So these are all things we can take a look at and see how they fit into the overall network of how people move around. Another distinguishing part of Saco is its natural resources and its natural features. Parks and recreation are a big part of that. One metric of, understanding sort of park service for a city is, you have a park for how many residents. And that stat up there, 1 park per 1,500 residents, puts Saco in just about the right ballpark compared to similar sized cities across the country. What this doesn't look at is accessibility to parks. So can people easily and safely walk or bike to parks, or do you have to get in your car to go all the time? There's obviously the coastline, which is a huge asset, the recreational opportunities along the river, which is a great opportunity. There's also the commercial use of the waterfront, and also, the working farms and the timber areas out in North Saco. So all of that sort of plays together as benefits that we can sort of study as we go through this planning process and how we work together with those. And finally here in this section, just thinking also about the historic character. Saco has 2 National Register historic districts, downtown and on Saco Island. And so thinking about how new growth can fit into that historic context is a really important consideration. Sustainability and resiliency, I mentioned this at the beginning. This is, what we see as kind of an overall framework for this plan. It's not just the environment, but it's also how we move around, how we grow, our water quality, the cost of our housing and our transportation. All of these kind of play into creating a community that can bounce back from shocks, that is resilient, and that can accommodate a wide range of people. But as we do look at the environmental portion of this, the state of Maine recently released a report on sort of its latest projections. And, it's not surprising, I think, if you follow this, to see that, temperatures are projected to continue to rise with a bigger impact in the winter season than in the summers here. Precipitation is going up, and those heavy rain events impact the stormwater system and the water treatment plant. For those coastal neighborhoods, the state is looking at, anywhere from 1.5 to 3 feet of relative sea level rise in the next 30 years, and anywhere from potentially 4 to almost 9 feet of sea level rise by 2100. So, all of these are long-term trends. Saco by itself can't solve these problems, but there are things that we can be thinking about today to help address those. This is just an example in 2100 and with almost 4 feet of sea level rise. This is just on a daily basis at high tide, where flooding would happen down by Camp Ellis. And so you can see, if you live in these neighborhoods, that that's a real nuisance to potentially have to deal with down the road. Finally, before we get to our breakout groups, just a quick word on, managing our fiscal health. And this really goes to the implementation of the comprehensive plan. There'll be recommendations here that will, cost money. And so we have to think about how we balance our expenses and our revenues. So as we look at property tax value in the city, this is mapping sort of property tax value on a per square foot basis. And the reds and the orange are higher value per square foot than the blues. And so what you can see in a quick glance here is that in the downtown and in-town neighborhoods and the coastal neighborhoods, the land on a per square foot basis is valued higher than the land along Portland Road or in North Saco. And so again, as we think about where we grow, how we grow, this is something to consider. And another part of that is the cost of water and sewer system, the infrastructure that supports growth and development. This map here shows that in the sort of blue color, that's where we have existing water and sewer service today. So if we direct growth to these areas, we're taking advantage of an expense that we've already made. The more that we grow in the gray areas that don't have service, or that only have one of those two types of services, now we're potentially, we're growing into more rural areas, we're potentially adding increased expenses for the city. So things, again, to think about as we move forward. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and for listening. I know this was a lot of information to get through very quickly. As I mentioned, this presentation is being recorded. It'll be posted online, so you can review it later, as well as the presentation, and go through kind of at your own pace. But now we want to switch gears and hear from you. We have done a lot of talking. We hope we haven't bored you too much, but we want to move to some Zoom breakout rooms. And I think that we're going to break into 6 different breakout rooms. So facilitators, I'm going to need all 6 of you to participate here. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we're in this very first phase of imagine. What is our shared vision for the future of Saco, and how do we start to talk about that? So I have 3 questions that I want us to be thinking about. Starting off, once we all get into our breakout rooms, we'll just do a roundtable introduction of everybody who is in the room, just kind of your name and what's your favorite thing about Saco. Whatever it is, it could be your backyard, it could be downtown, it could be, we heard Boom Road on a bicycle on a weekend morning at our committee meeting last week. Whatever that is, we want to hear that because that helps us understand what's important to you. Second question, what's one thing that you'd like to change or improve here? And I'd really encourage you to think bigger picture. You might say, we really need a new crosswalk to get to the school, and that's important, but in a comprehensive plan, let's think a little bigger picture. Are there, is that a symptom of needing to make other accommodations for people who are walking, people who are biking, who aren't necessarily driving all the way? So think a little bigger picture, a little longer term for that question. And then the third one here, what we're ultimately trying to work towards here is a vision statement for Saco in 2035. That's kind of our guiding statement for all the other work that we do during this process. So we'd like you to share what for you are your top 1 or 2 priorities when you think about the future of Saco. What do you think we need to be working on during this process? Is it strengthening downtown? Is it protecting our coastal neighborhoods? Is it attracting different types of jobs here? Is it preserving the rural and agricultural areas? Whatever that is, whatever your priorities are, we'll go around and share those individually with the group. But then I want to talk together and for the group to come to a general consensus on what your top 3 to 5 shared priorities are. And then once we're finished with the breakout room, we'll come back to this for just a quick wrap up. I'll try to share what some of those shared priorities are, and then share some information about the website that'll be the city's webpage that has some more information for you to go to. So at this point, we're going to break into 6 Zoom breakout rooms. Each room will have a facilitator who's going to sort of lead the discussion through these 3 questions. I think given the size of the group that we have, the groups that we'll have, we're going to spend about 30 minutes on this breakout discussion. So about 10 minutes per question, maybe a little faster for the first 2 questions, and maybe 12 minutes for the third question. Isabel is going to be our timekeeper. She'll send out a message to the breakout rooms every 10 minutes to help keep us on track. And then we will reconvene when we are complete here. So with that, I will say thank you again. Please, after the breakout room, do hang on. We will come back for just a sort of a 5-minute wrap up. But we look forward to hearing from you. We thank you a lot for being here tonight, for hearing about this planning process, and we look forward to talking with you tonight and throughout the course of this. So Isabel, when you're ready, you can open up the breakout rooms. And for all the participants, it'll take just a moment as we transition into that, and we'll unmute everybody once we're in the breakout rooms. So thank you very much, and we'll talk to you in just a minute. If you were like my small group breakout, it was rapid fire at the very end to get through everything. But I hope that the conversations were interesting. I hope you maybe heard something new from a fellow resident or something interesting. And hopefully found this helpful. What I want to do to kind of wrap this up, and then I will let everyone get on to their dinners and the rest of their evenings. Let me share my screen again. Oops. Did this in the wrong order. So I just, in terms of sort of the things that I heard in, my breakout group, just as one, snapshot of a conversation, when we talked about favorite things here in Saco, there were several people talking about, talking in different ways, but generally getting to a sense of community, knowing their neighbors, being able to walk down the street, appreciating the trails and the natural areas near where they lived. So it was interesting to hear that, things to change or improve, transportation and traffic issues were brought up, the physical condition of the schools, and those are things that we've heard before in some of the stakeholder conversations that we've also had. And then in talking about the vision, it was interesting, there were different ways that people talked about it, but a lot of the themes came around to sort of, broadly speaking, economic development, growing in higher paying jobs, training residents for those growth industries, making sure that, the chart that I showed earlier in the presentation of the population growth in Saco, being at a faster rate than the job growth, which is the inverse of all the neighboring communities, trying to focus on that and bring that a little bit more into balance, try to attract more jobs here. So, those were some of the interesting things in our group, and we'll produce sort of a meeting summary that will encapsulate what the other breakout rooms talked about as well. So with our last few minutes here, I did want to go back to one previous planning effort that was completed here about 5 or 6 years ago now, which was Bridge 2025. And I'm sure some of you may be aware of that. This may be a new thing to others of you, but that was a pretty extensive public engagement process around, asking some of these same questions. And I think it was interesting, and at least in my small group, hearing some of these same themes being talked about, here, especially that sense of community. And so, also the idea of the historic small city and the natural setting. So I think there's some interesting kind of continuation of a lot of these themes. Similarly, things to improve, again, business development, traffic concerns, improving downtown. So continuing forward with those. And then these were the vision themes that came out of that process. And I think there's a lot that we can kind of build on for this process. And, I think the message here is that, these are consistently things we want to keep getting better at. I'm sure over the last 5 years, a lot of progress has been made in a lot of these areas. And I'm sure there is still progress to be made in the future. Building on some of the work that the city is already doing, with the main Turnpike project, which is a Turnpike project, not a city project, but work to address some of those, transportation issues. The school that, is next up on the state construction funding list, that's still a few years off, but there's progress being made in that area. And so building on that process and then, figuring out what is the next thing as we keep looking forward. So these are kind of the bigger picture questions and things that we're going to be working on together with the long range planning committee as we come back, both in virtual meetings like this and in online exercises, surveys, other ways to hear from people. So those are some of the things that we're going to be working on through this process. Just to conclude here with next steps, kind of where we're going. As I mentioned at the very beginning, we are in the community visioning stage, starting to develop what is our overall vision. I think drawing from a lot of the good work that has already been done, hopefully hearing from new voices, people who have just, moved to the city within the last couple of years, younger people, high school students, grade school students, because as we think about this over the next 10 to 15 years, those high school students are going to go off to college and then have to decide where they want to go to start their careers. And, we may want a lot of them to come back, maybe not live at home, but live near here, take those new jobs, build their career here. So hearing from them about what's important for them, what would draw them back to this area. The next kind of major public outreach effort is going to be around exploring some very specific topics through kind of, roundtable panel discussion or work sessions. That'll come up in the spring. And then, as I mentioned, getting, starting to develop some of the strategies and the implementation planning over the summer and fall. So I'd encourage you to keep a tab on the city website if you haven't already. Provide your email so that you can keep up to date on the latest surveys that are out, the next meetings that are coming up, some of the draft materials that will be posted on the website in the future. Finally, as I mentioned at the very beginning, this presentation will be posted online shortly. There will also be an online survey that some of the questions will be similar to what we discussed today, but there are some other questions. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that survey and complete it. That'll be open for the next 2 weeks. And then there's also an interactive mapping exercise. So you'll be able to go to the website once that's up, should be sometime tomorrow. Look at a map of the city and place some pins to help us, as we discussed today, what are some places that you love? What are some areas you'd love to see change? And then just general ideas, if you have a great idea about a particular place here, we'd love to hear it and just gather that input. So this is the city's webpage address here. If you haven't already, you can go check that out. That has the previous comprehensive plans, some more information about the schedule and sort of what we're trying to accomplish here. And there will shortly be a link to that interactive website where the survey and the map will be available. So just I think closing message for tonight, I just really want to thank you for participating. Thank you for your time. I know evening meetings on a weeknight are always kind of hard. And so we hope that the website will be another resource for you at your own pace to go through, participate, learn more about this process and stay engaged and involved. And lastly, just help us spread the word. You know, it was great that everybody came out tonight that did, but, you know, we would love to hear from far more people than this. So tell your neighbors, your friends, you know, if you have children at home, encourage them to go online and take that survey and do that mapping exercise. We really do want to hear from as many people as we can and would appreciate your help with that. So, you know, that's all for us. We really thank you for your time tonight. Denise, I don't see you anymore on my video, but if
I'm
you had
here.
any closing comments for us, I will hand it off to you and say goodnight.
Well, again, reiterating, thank you very much, everybody, for being involved. And as Phil was mentioning, please spread the word. We want to get this out as much as possible. This affects our future. And so I think as many people that can be involved, and I think Phil's encouraging folks that have students at home to take the surveys, great, because these are the folks that will be growing into our schools, high schools, and wanting to come back to Saco. And so they want to come back to a community they want to be within. So thanks again, everybody. And thank you for your time. We hope that the upcoming meetings won't be as long, but we thank you for your time this evening. Have a good night.
Thank you very much. Good night.